value from success, growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold-copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJ Muir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart, and best of the season.
Same to you, Jim. Thank you.
Stewart, we have some interesting stories to talk about to wrap up the year for our interviews. And first off is something hot off the news wires. Canada, for national security reasons, has rejected China's Shandong Resources bid for Nunavut's TMAC Resources gold mine. Is this a sign of future rejections for China trying to move into Canada's sensitive regions?
Well, there's the northern security story, and there's also the national security story. And this is a year when Canada's relations with China have been very quietly, because I don't think Ottawa wants to draw attention to this. China is such an important trading partner for us. And yet, at the same time, they are holding 2 Canadians as prisoners who should not be held, and finding ways to express our frustration and unhappiness with the situation. I'm sure are present in decision making. We'll probably have a hard time knowing for sure exactly how that thinking may or may not figure into this decision. Nevertheless, it sends a signal to a Chinese company that it's not wanted, or Chinese interests are not wanted in a sensitive part of the country. It's not the first time that a Chinese-owned energy or mining company has faced this in Canada's north. There was a mine in the Peel that was being proposed, or rather, drilling for conventional oil and gas, I should say, was rejected a few years ago, and it wasn't at a time of the same amount of tension. I think this one today, the TMAC deal, is going to be read as more of a security thing.
Speaking of rejection, the Tech Frontier mine was turned down. What's the story there?
Well, we're looking back on an eventful year in so many ways, and one of the big stories of the year, I think, was back in February. Teck Resources, which is a Vancouver-based company, was proposing to build a large oil sands mine in northern Alberta. It would have been a multi-billion-dollar, multi-decade project, employing tens of thousands of Canadians at a level of operations that was thought to be environmentally possible and sound within the performance standards for such a mine. But as political tension grew over whether or not to do it, because it was a federal cabinet decision, Teck decided to just pull her back. They, instead of waiting for a yes or no, they said, we're going to withdraw our application and maybe come back to it later. They didn't really talk about what would be needed. I think the rather cryptic messages that the company issued at the time were along the lines of, look, if and when Canada can get its story straight as to what it really wants from companies like us that are prepared to make large investments to create jobs and revenues for government, then we'll be here to maybe come back in. But for the moment, it's just not a place we want to be, and that's where it rests today.
We'll have more from Stewart Muir right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, the biggest story perhaps of the year were all the blockades that shut down rail traffic across the country as people wanted Aboriginal rights and natural resources respected. What can you tell us about it, and will it continue to be a big story in Canada in the new year?
Yeah, the stories I wanted to talk about today, Jim, are ones that have more significance than just that news event. And that was true, I think, of TMAC, of the Teck Resources decision. It's also true of what some have called the Wet'suwet'en crisis. The Wet'suwet'en, of course, is a First Nation of 6 different groups spread around the Bulkley Valley in northwest BC. They were in the news, I would say, the prime reason being that a very small number of activists, many of them having nothing to do with the Wet'suwet'en people themselves, decided they had a chance to get their message out across the country by encouraging the like-minded sympathizers they found in different Canadian cities to try to protest against one particular project, the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which crosses through the Wet'suwet'en traditional territories, and try to stop that project. So that was really the goal of that. I traveled through that area myself at the time this was happening because I realized back in late January, early February, that there was something significant happening. We started to see the rail blockades, and all of a sudden, shipping around the country was blocked. It was causing international shippers and buyers of Canadian goods to suddenly start asking what's going on here. Why is Canada not functioning? And it became just a crisis level incident. As I traveled around the Wet'suwet'en traditional territories, meeting a lot of Wet'suwet'en people, I quickly realized that the official story, as it were, the mainstream media telling of this, which was along the lines of, look, the Wet'suwet'en people are speaking up against this project, they must not be happy with it. Well, it turns out almost the exact opposite is true. Wet'suwet'en people, majority of them, actually support the Coastal GasLink pipeline. It was a small group of radicals who blockaded the pipeline in a remote bush area. There's real issues there, Jim. Don't get me wrong. I think these are important national level judicial issues that have not been resolved, and it is incumbent upon governments to work on that. And I think governments are working on it, but it was anything but this sort of uprising by a group of Indigenous people. In fact, they're all over the map, just like everyone else is. I think there's divisions in every community, and there certainly were those divisions. So there were lots of First Nations members who were enjoying the employment from it. They saw the revenues that allowed local governments there. I visited one First Nation. It had transit service. It was doing programs for the elderly. I walked into one gathering at the invitation of one community group, and I saw that traditional languages were being taught by elders to the younger generation, because that's so important to keeping a culture together, to have language, and they're being lost in those areas. It really is a cultural crisis and problem that's happening. That's part of it. It's a very complex story. At any rate, I do look back on 2020, and when I say what were the big stories, that was a big story, because it did really, I think, get noticed by everyone in Canada. It affected everybody, but it wasn't really quite what met the eye. something different was going on. And we'll see that play out over coming years. Here's another story, also huge, and that's the reconciliation process for Indigenous people in Canada. It's being driven forward by legislation in BC, which is called the Declaration. That's one way of referring to UNDRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. I'm a real strong supporter of this kind of legislation when it's applied effectively, because it's allowing First Nations who have traditional territories all over the country to reconcile over the past wrongs that have been caused by colonialization, and that's ultimately a good thing for all Canadians. So this process is now at the federal level too, because we had this fall the federal legislation, Bill 15, that was introduced that will bring about an UNDRIP or declaration law in Canada. The exact impact of it is going to be debated. I think there's some very legitimate toing and froing on what the significance is. For example, is there a veto? Well, that's a hot topic in the legal community, and we'll be hearing a lot about it. In fact, our group is going to be staging a large event, we hope in September, when people are able to gather together again to bring together thought leaders and practitioners of business in Indigenous communities to tell us what we need to know about this emerging topic.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, many of us still remember back in April, the futures market for oil hit negative prices. What did that mean for the Canadian oil patch and for our national revenue situation?
Well, it's really, in terms of global energy and Canadian energy, that would be the biggest single story of the year, because negative oil prices, like who had ever heard of negative anything? But we saw it back in March. And it was, if you try to understand the technical reasons exactly that were driving that phenomenon, it would be almost too difficult to understand it fully. But at one level, it was just an oversupply of a commodity, and a lack of storage for that commodity while it was in oversupply caused it to be without value, because no one who was capable of buying it would have any place to put it, because all the storage places were full because people were not using it. So that's the simple explanation for it. And I would advise getting into anyone who's trying to study the complexity of it. It is a mind-bendingly complex global trading system we have there. At any rate, it didn't last that long, but who can forget? I was in Edmonton, went through there. That's where typically there's very cheap gasoline at the gas stations. It got down to 50 cents or 55 cents there on a day when I was driving in Edmonton. It was pretty shocking. And, who among us would not love to have 50-cent gasoline all the time? Well, we know that's not reality. It came back up. But it wasn't just the retail gas prices. It had, of course, an enormous impact on Canada as an energy producer. We have, of course, a very significant part of our economy tied up in this. And when you see global consumption fall the way it did, it affects everybody. We've seen layoffs. We've seen mergers in the industry. We've seen a lot of plans go by the wayside because of what happened. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing in the end. I think we'll look back and see that there have been efficiencies gained through the hard times. That's what always happens when there's a downturn in the oil industry. I think it's probably true of other industries too. It just doesn't get as much attention as it does in oil because we've seen the cost of production reduce. We've seen the oil producers say, okay, well, if we want to stay in business through these low cost periods, we just have to get leaner and leaner. And, we've already had a period after 2014 when there was a global oil price crash where people did go through that. And I think the industry probably felt, well, we've seen the worst of it. Well, that was before 2020. It was only this year that we truly scraped the bottom of the worst. Maybe there's more pain to come in future. Who knows? But it's left us at the end of the year, as prices come back up again around the $50 mark, feeling that, hey, $50 ain't so bad, which is pretty shocking when you consider back in 2014, oil was over $100 a barrel.
The Cenovus Energy and Husky merger, was that out of desperation, or does it give us hope for the future for the oil patch?
Well, that's another of the big stories, Jim. I think that one stands out. Here are two big Western Canadian companies. You look at the big firms in Western Canada, typically they are involved in natural resources, whether that's mining, the forest companies, the big agriculture companies, and of course the energy, oil and gas companies. So when you see a merger of this scale, $4 billion acquisition by Cenovus to buy Husky, these are two quality companies. They both have big oil sands operations. They do a lot of other stuff too. Cenovus is well known. Its oil sands operations are all SAGD. They're all in unconventional production where they're using things like steam to drill down under the ground and soften up the oil, get it flowing, and pump it up that way. So it's not the oil sands mining that a lot of people are more familiar with, but it's a way of getting at the deeper reservoirs that are hard to get at through mining. And there's a lot of growth coming up in that. So I think Cenovus has very quietly, sometimes not so quietly, been using its scale to make strategic acquisitions. Husky's good. It's got a lot of operations in Saskatchewan. Both companies are ones that will be shipping their oil into the new Trans Mountain line and sending that to markets by sea, which means that they have a shared interest in making sure that project gets finished on time and on budget. So I think what's good for Cenovus and Husky, and now this new combined version will be good for Western Canada. It'll keep jobs here. It shows that even though we saw some foreign companies leave Canada for a variety of reasons, we do have good Canadian companies that are showing confidence in our industries, which is great. We need that.
The proposed, I don't know if it's proposed or even legislated clean fuel standard, which some people are calling an extra carbon tax. How devastating could that be to the Canadian energy patch, and how devastating could it be to someone's household budget?
Yeah, well, there are definitely some studies out there that show Canadians will be paying more. One thing that happened when the clean fuel standard, having been talked about for a long time, it was finally tabled, and the industry saw details of it just a few days ago, that there was a little bit of a sigh of relief because they didn't include a couple of categories, including gaseous fuels. And that was concerning a lot of people. There's no clean fuel standard type of legislation or regulation anywhere in the world that covers gaseous fuels. It's only liquid fuels. In BC, we've had, in effect, a clean fuel standard since, I believe, 2008, where it has affected the emissions intensity of fuel. So gasoline or diesel, they have to be reduced every year in the emissions they create. So 1 liter of gasoline in 2020 has to emit less CO2 and other greenhouse gas causing emissions in 2021 than it did this year under these rules. And they have different ways of doing that. It might be through sort of trading mechanisms. It might be through changing the equipment or the process that they use, or it might be the feedstock. They might get different, ethanol, for example, that would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And so in principle, I think CFS is a rational thing to do to reduce the emissions impact, but it has to be implemented fairly so there's a level playing field, and Canadian companies or Canadian-based refineries are not discriminated against. You know, you don't want a situation where suddenly it's easier for the U.S. to manufacture more fuel and then dump it into Canada because we've priced our own industry out of the country. And if that happens, you know, I think that there will be, you know, just losing your energy industry as a country is something that most countries don't ever want to do. That's why they have state-owned oil companies. State-owned pipeline companies are very common because energy is really the most important determinant you have in having a successful economy. You know, energy is the input that makes everything happen. So if you lose control of that, you lose control of your economy. That's one thing that I think a lot of people feared was at risk with CFS. So it was good to see the easing on the gaseous front. I think there still are concerns on consumer costs. So I think those who are pushing CFS in government need to do a better job on that. If they're saying that this won't harm you, well, you know, prove it. And right now, a lot of people are not convinced that this is so. And just, you know, what would be a worse time to choose than now to add new costs to consumers? You know, coming out of this global recession or depression level, you know, rollback of the economy. It's not the right time for it. And I think, you know, if they're really practical about it and humane about it, they might look at the timeline and say, let's wait. We can wait till 2023. We don't need to rush ahead with this, and let's do it when we have better conditions. Whether they do that or not, we'll see. And then the fact that we have a new commitment to price carbon at $170 per ton. It's a complete shock to see that. The government is saying it's what we need to do to meet and exceed our Paris climate commitments. And, you know, I think the news took a lot of people by surprise a week and a half ago when it came out. It also raises the question, well, if you're doing this, if you're putting a price on carbon, why are you also regulating it? You know, it's a belt and suspenders here. Pick a lane. If you really believe that carbon pricing is the way to reduce emissions, then price carbon. Don't do these other things as well that are in addition to it, because it confuses the marketplace. It's kind of it's an impure method in the sense of you know, choosing a lever of government, of intervention to affect an outcome. And I think in BC's case, we didn't see an enormous difference. I know there's a lot of, you know, there's a big fan club in BC for the carbon tax and the clean fuel approach. In actual fact, you look at what happened over the 12 years we've had it, it's not an enormous difference. You know, I think it's definitely had some measurable change, but, you know, the biggest driver of how much fuel we use and how much emissions we create is the economy. When the economy picks up, we use more fuel. It's year in, year out. You can see the evidence of that. So, we want to have a healthy economy, which means using fuel, but how do we reduce the environmental impacts of that fuel? That's the tricky one. So, you know, points to governments that are trying to find the right way to do it, but they need to stay open and flexible and watch what they do over time and make adjustments as necessary. Do not make it impossible to have industry in Canada. If you make it too difficult, industry will just take its money and go elsewhere. So many people are doing that already. Manufacturers are doing that. You know, we have forest companies are going elsewhere because we make it too difficult to operate. Mining companies just go elsewhere. Energy companies do the same. And, you know, you can feel good. Oh, we're saving the environment by doing that. Actually, it doesn't make any difference. It does the opposite by empowering places with a reckless approach to the environment to just do more of the same. And it prevents Canadians who've got the best standards in the world from doing their good work in ways that do benefit the world. So you've got to be so careful with this.
Stewart, all the best to you and yours through the holiday season.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at House Street. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Best of the season.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.